Wheel of Genre, the show for people who are high on their own supply. Right now, we're reading every story in the Dangerous Visions anthology, and we just got to Brian Aldiss's The Night That All Time Broke Out. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in how much fidelity a science fiction concept needs to have to real life. How plausible does something need to be?
I'm Bob. I'm interested in nostalgia and why is it or why is it not important in science fiction? Zach, fidelity. This is a strange, I guess all of these have been strange, but this story starts out quite normal and it just spirals out of control into, well, maybe not out of control, but into non-normalcy at all. Why do you bring up fidelity for this story?
Well, Darko Suvin, one of the I guess you could say like theorists of science fiction, basically says that science fiction begins with a kind of fictional proposition. It says, here's one thing we're going to change about the world that, you and I are familiar with. The reader and the author, we all share a common world, but here's one thing that's going to be different. And then we are going to develop the implications of that step by step by step. I think that most pieces of SF that we've read probably fall somewhere within that. But with this one, what we're being asked to believe is that time itself is some kind of material substance, like a gas. And, like you would find, like a deposit of like methane gas within the earth, you could find deposits of time. And then people would use it for medicine or to take nostalgia trips or to visit the past, or if they wanted to, they say that the more you do, you can even slip into the consciousness of the previous generation. So before you were born, it's not just far-fetched. It just defies our understanding of how, basic concepts of physics work.
Fair. So it's too fiction, not science enough for science fiction. I think Ursula K. Le Guin would say something similar. She wants to describe the world around her. So for her, science fiction concepts would be changing one small thing and then describing what she then envisions to be the most realistic new future based on that one change. So this, I don't know if it really rejects that idea, because even though time is a object here, or time is kind of a resource, it's being pumped into their house, it's being passaged from like a depot into their house by pipes. And then when it breaks loose, I think that's when things get really out of hand. But I understand this idea of a couple wanting to re-experience the past. And I think it's interesting to see the social aspects of this science fiction. Even though the science is a little bit hand-wavy, a little bit too fantastical, I think it is kind of an interesting social science fiction story. But
I like that word hand-wavy. I think that's like a good back-of-the-pocket word. It's hand-wavy. The author waves away how it works and expects the reader to wave it away as well. It doesn't matter. I think for me, what I find is that oftentimes a certain kind of implausibility can get in the way of my ability to understand the characters, to connect with the characters on a human level. Because almost by implication, if I'm being asked to hand wave away the world, I feel like I'm also, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. The characters get hand waved away as well. But with this, did you find that you were able to really connect with these people and understand them? Like, did they feel real to you?
Zach, I don't know their names. I have no idea. I feel like these characters don't matter at all, and the author doesn't care about the characters. Everything they say is a cliche. Their situations are a cliche, and all they do is basically fill in what's going on around them. Not to critique the story that much, but I mean, that's how the characters feel.
Tell us how you really feel, Bob.
Sorry, that was very rude. But the characters, I don't think he's that concerned with them. And I think for this story, that's what he wants. He wants to do, again, the hand waving. It feels like a magic trick at the end. Yes, now time is flowing through this house. It starts to leak. So this couple who are talking about, there's a weird moment in here too, but they're talking about going back and visiting, the time when it's early and we've just had breakfast and we don't have to put anything away. It's a nice, relaxing time. Let's go back there. So they actually, for their experience, physically go back and have the same sensations they've had before. That's a very confusing thing to think about because you're also experiencing what you've already experienced. How can you have the identical sensation while you're reflecting on it? But then things go wrong. When it leaks, they start... basically, time is running through their house at a very fast pace. And here's a way that I think that the author describes it. Brian Aldiss describes it in a pretty cool way. He says they're eating dinner and then suddenly all of these flavors start shooting through their mouth. So, quote, "The lobster was sickening in their mouths as they seemed to chew in turn turkey or cheese or game or trifle or sponge pudding or ice cream or breakfast cereal." So they're rushing through all of these past experiences at a very high velocity. Then when it gets super fantastical, or maybe the most science fiction part, when they do go in to find what is wrong with the leak, where is this happening? Like you said, they can dig down, they can find these almost like an ore, but it's time. And as they do so, they seem to get what they asked for, and it seems almost like a punishment where we wanted nostalgia, and now you really get nostalgia because now you're cavemen. They go all the way back in time and they inhabit the original people. So they can just say erg and that kind of thing.
It sounds like you read a moral lesson into this.
I don't know if it's intentionally a moral lesson, but a kind of punchline, a joke. You want nostalgia, you want to go back in time. I'll get you. By tricking you right back to... it's like asking for something from a genie and you don't specify well enough and the genie just screws you over to make fun of you. I think Brian Aldiss has done that to these characters that he doesn't care about. This poor couple.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that lobster in the mouth scene because, I mean, I don't need much. I feel like I'm really going to dwell on this whole how does it work thing. Okay. But I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like that, like I'm going to come back to my thought process on this as I was reading that scene, but like, I wish I could just move on and emotionally from this paragraph. But, this idea that like they're going back in time, or rather their food is in their mouth is going back in time. So like their turkey, the lobster within their mouth becomes turkey, becomes ice cream, becomes, all these other things. And that made me be like, oh, so it's truly like a nostalgia machine. Like, because the food wouldn't be going back in time it must just be that their experience, like they inhaled the thing and they experience time, earlier times. But then they use like the time gas to like regrow a tooth that had fallen out. Things like that, which tells me that it's not just in their heads. I don't know. That's the last I'll say on this. But I think that if it was only nostalgia air, like a drug they took that sent them into the past, mutually even, I think that could be a really cool and interesting story because that would make it explicitly about nostalgia. And in that sense, like it becomes almost like a warning on the dangers of nostalgia. You know what I mean? Or like, oh, you like nostalgia so much? Why don't you go live in the ancient past? Why don't you just start civilization over, But there's a kind of like, it just didn't feel like a beautiful arc to me,
So you kind of feel like Brian Aldiss is being a little facetious. Oh, you want nostalgia? I'll throw you into nostalgia. I think it's an interesting idea because science fiction, at least in Golden Age and now New Wave, everything is being upturned, everything is changing. We don't want nostalgia at all, it feels like. This feels like the first nostalgic piece, although it's not necessarily, but the idea is this couple wants to relive their greatest moments, their most beautiful moments. So for them, it is nostalgia. And for lots of the people using this, it is also. It reminds me of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep at the very beginning, when you can dial whatever emotion you want or whatever, like a physical experience. I think like 9 is infinite malaise, 7 is feeling happy and chipper, something like that. It also reminds me a lot, although it's different. And you said if this were just a nostalgia machine, that could be interesting. But it does remind me of Hyperion when we have, I think it's the monk's tale, or the priest's tale, when his daughter is moving backwards in time. She gets to 23 years old, she ends up in an accident, and then she is physically aging backwards. The
Scholar's Tale.
Sensation,
the Scholar's Tale.
Is it the Scholar's Tale? Yeah.
Yeah.
Weintraub, whatever his name is.
Yeah, Saul Weintraub. Yeah.
Saul Weintraub, thank you. So his daughter is going back in time, but now all of society, we only see it mostly through these two people, and then it just explodes and we see it through all of society. But these two people are going through something that is now irreversible. It was in their control, and now they're stuck in that era forever. I mean, they're stuck. They're basically, they have restarted human civilization because of one little mishap with technology. I liked that, and it reminds me of Saul Weintraub. What do you think of Brian Aldiss? This is our first time reading him. He wrote 80 books, 300 short stories. That seems to be kind of normal for all of the people in Dangerous Visions. But what do what do you think of his writing? And also, I'm going to ask you later, what do you think about his introduction to this story? But what do you think about his writing? How does it fit in the new wave, or does it for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It felt to me a lot more funny than the other ones. And actually, when I think about British science fiction, I think the main author who comes to my mind is someone like Douglas Adams. And it might be unfair to just compare every British author to Douglas Adams, which is kind of which we really should read Douglas Adams for this show, by the way. But there's a kind of humor to it. There's a kind of like wittiness. Maybe Roald Dahl is another example of a kind of British author who has this kind of wink about him. And so I found that tone to be completely out of line with the rest of the stories that we've read, which are all very self-serious. And, when we talk, as we inevitably do, about what it means to be a dangerous vision, as we've read through this, to me, I was like, how does this become a dangerous vision? But I think that there's a certain stripe of humor that Brian Aldiss has, and I can't help but wonder if it was played up for this story, where the man makes a bunch of jokes about them doing the gas for his wife to become younger because he has a Lolita complex. And I was just like,
Yes. Yes, that one's just thrown in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt thrown in there in a way that made me be like, was that there in the first draft? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It felt so out of place with the rest of the story, but it felt in place with the rest of the anthology.
With the rest of it, yeah. I wonder if Harlan Ellison just slipped it in there, or if he said, it's not dangerous enough, so he just put it in one weird thing. When I was reading this, I wrote a note that says 100% not at all interested in the project. That's what I thought of Brian Aldiss's introduction to his story. And I thought he just saw the ad and sent in one of his stories, because he says, I was writing this and I thought it was one of the wackiest ideas I ever heard. That's his quote. Let's hope there are a few more wacky ideas in my head. I'd hate to have to go back to work, because he's talking about he worked before and then finally he started making money writing these stories, and he could retire and just write more stories. Not really retire, but become a full-time author. Basically retirement.
I started writing full-time. The best idea I ever had. Oh, great, man.
Yeah, but he doesn't even say this is the best. He just says the strangest, like zaniest idea. And that is what authors tell you when they're sending to your anthology and they just read the byline. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, dangerous ideas. I got one. I'll send it to you. This is from 40 years ago. No one published it, but here you go. But I found out I was completely wrong, and I thought this was very, very interesting. Brian Aldiss is really important for New Wave. He is a big proponent of the British New Wave, and he's called the leader of the British New Wave. In 1967, this critic says that Aldiss, J.G. Ballard, Zelazny, and Delaney are a earth-shaking new kind of writer and leader in the New Wave. So he is considered maybe even higher than Ellison at the time, or was considered as pushing the New Wave. And I did not get that feeling at all. I was just very surprised by this.
Yeah, totally. Is it because it doesn't take place in space? That it's more kind of an alternate reality? I mean, I don't know. There's so many stripes. It's hard to pick any one thing, but
it feels like it's not New Wave. There's no blood. All of the stories have been blood. They've either been sacrilegious, deliberately tearing down some sort of religion, killing people. This feels like nostalgia for nostalgia. No, I shouldn't say that. It feels like the premise is, hey, people love nostalgia. This is a science fiction story, and all Golden Age before has been nostalgia. Actually, maybe that's why it fits into this, because if they are New Wave leaving and jettisoning Golden Age, they're trying to go to a completely new thing. And now here is a taste of your own medicine, Golden Age. If you want nostalgia, I'll give it to you. You will be so full up on nostalgia that you will become a caveman. And that's maybe what the criticism of the old readership and the old authors and the old stories is, that they're cavemen.
So this is an interesting idea. All Golden Age is nostalgia, because I feel like, is Golden Age science fiction nostalgia for the people who are writing it at the time? Or is it nostalgia for the people who are reading it, in the decades after it's published? Or is it nostalgic for us now looking at it and being like, oh, that's quaint? Like, because for me, the main adjective is optimistic. It's optimistic for the future, but that's a different direction than nostalgia.
Well, think of the Jetsons. I mean, we have like retro future, that was a really big thing. And I think maybe what's going on, science fiction starts, with H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, like 100 years, about 100 years before this. So we have science fiction, and maybe it has run its course for these new wave authors. Maybe it feels like they're beating a dead horse of, this is the old vision of the future. Yes, it was optimistic. Yes, it was gold. Yes, it was nice. People solved problems and people were hunky-dory all the time. Now, maybe they don't want that, and they're deliberately attacking that and saying, look, if you want to be hunky-dory all the time, great, but we've been in 60 years of stagnation. Please, for the love of God, can we leave that behind? I think maybe that's what's going on.
One question I have for you is, the short story ends on a very particular note, and I'm just going to read the final paragraph and sentence. Together, the man and his woman trudged over the hill, heading back for the wilds like most of the rest of humanity, their bent and uncouth forms silhouetted against the first ragged banners of the light in the sky. Uglum fum hum morn glug humk, the woman muttered, which means, roughly translated from the old stone, why the heck does this always have to happen to mankind just when he's on the goddamn point of getting civilized again? So the idea that he's ending on is this idea of a kind of cyclical nature of humanity's development. We get reduced down to the Stone Age, and then we go through all of civilization again, apparently discover the time gas, and get reduced back down to the Stone Age each time, and it's this recurring thing. That's a big idea to throw in right at the end. How did you receive it? Like, what did you think of it?
It feels like that's what the author likes to do, is you lead up towards a punchline. This story actually did remind me a lot of Bartlemy. Where you start with the crazy premise and you just see how long you can go. And George Saunders talks about it being playing with a little racetrack where you get your little car going faster and faster, and you add those little motors so your car can just keep going faster, and eventually it just has to crash. And I think that's what he might be doing here too, is that not that tradition necessarily, but that effect. Look, I'm going to dazzle you until I explode you. But I think it's also more modern, maybe, than we are giving it credit for. We said maybe it was over just obsessed with nostalgia, or if nostalgia is the premise. There's an interesting thing that was just discovered at the bottom of the ocean called black oxygen. Have you heard about this?
No, have not.
So it's pretty cool. So we've always thought that oxygen has to be produced through some sort of, often you would think photosynthesis. Plants need to produce oxygen. That is what we think about when we think about oxygen. But there is a mineral that has just been discovered at the bottom of the ocean. So people are calling it black oxygen, kind of like dark matter or something like that, or dark oxygen maybe. And so it is just a rock that produces its own oxygen. That made me think about this story. This story made me think about that a little bit, where you find time. Oh, we've always had time. We've always thought we've understood time, but time has actually been underground, and it's the thing that you can discover. And as soon as you discover it, all your preconceived notions are exploded. They're dashed. I keep saying exploded. Apologies. But it also started making me think about with all of the AI conversations going on, all of the AI happening around us, there is an idea of eventually we will be able to come to a point in our development where we can make our own simulation. When we do that, or when any society does that, they're going to inevitably want to do it to try it. When they do that, it will create a new kind of creation, and those people will eventually advance until they create their own simulation, going around in a cyclical form again and again and again, as if we're just sea monkeys that have adapted so much we've made nuclear armament. But I think that feeling, I get both of those feelings from this story. So it is, even though it is a parlor trick, even though it is a little magic show, I think it is underneath an interesting science fiction idea. Well, it's not very scientific, but it's a science fiction idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you believe it?
Do I believe it? Well, show me the time gas first. I would be interested in seeing maybe Brian Aldiss's more renowned work. Show me like the number one novel on Goodreads that Brian Aldiss wrote, or like the Hugo Award-winning Brian Aldiss. And I want to see where he goes there, because like you said, it feels like this one might have just been dashed off for the sake of getting in an anthology. And I think there's potential to see what else he can do. Especially because many of the things I fault him for on this are things that he preemptively says, I was being a bit silly. So yeah, let's keep his name on the radar.
Brian Aldiss, you make the cut.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.